Hello, welcome everyone. I guess you can hear me? Yeah, looks like that's good. So welcome to this session on vCenter High Availability. I'm Madhub Gulati from vSphere Product Management Team. My team focuses on vCenter, a lot of aspects of vCenter lifecycle around deployments, availability, the appliance, backup recovery and things like that. And I have with me Mohan.
I'm Mohan Pateri. I'm a solutions architect that I work with Madhup on all vCenter related customer queries and also blog articles and white papers.
Yeah, so you would, anytime you have questions that you bring up, you would see Mohan answering a lot of questions for you. So welcome to this session. Today we're going to talk about vCenter availability. This has been a topic of interest for a while. We've been talking to a lot of customers and we've heard a lot of you asking for what are we doing in this area, both because you're upgrading to 6.0, what's there in 6.0, what's happening beyond 6.0. And today we intend to answer those questions. Towards the end of the session, we also intend to do a tech preview demo of the future stuff that we are working on. So just for folks to know. Again, a lot of material here towards the end would be on the futures. So it's, just use your discretion when you share this information, but it's public. So we're going to go over why is high availability important. I won't spend too much time on it because if all of you are here, that means it's important. But we will talk about a few things, why we think and what we have heard from customers on why it's important. We'll go over the 6.0, vSphere 6.0 options for high availability. And then we'll talk about a tech preview of what we are doing beyond 6.0. So why is it important? And what we have seen is over the years, the role of vCenter in your center has changed. So earlier people used to look at it as an administrative console, gives you visibility into your ESX infrastructure, the VMs, allows you to do certain operations. So that was basically sort of the admin capabilities of vCenter, right? But what we've seen is as you evolve to a cloud model, vCenter is becoming a critical component in the end-to-end cloud delivery. So you might have some self-service features on top, or you might have other homegrown tools that are talking into vCenter APIs. So you might have other products that rely on vCenter. And so vCenter availability is getting more and more critical, and we just cannot afford for vCenter to go down. So here are a few reasons we have heard from our customers. Of course, as an administrative console, if it's down, you just lose its lights out, right? You just don't see what's in your environment. Also, in terms of provisioning, a lot of times, your line of business users are provisioning VMs, etc., and they're relying on vCenter to be available so that the provisioning can go through. And it becomes, it's a downtime for not just IT, it becomes a downtime for your business users if they cannot access the portal. Also, it's a foundation for VDI. How many of you here have a virtual desktop infrastructure? Quite a few of you. So again, VDI solutions rely on vCenter APIs for a lot of operations, so vCenter needs to be up. And how many of you use third-party backup solutions that kind of talk to vCenter? Yeah. Again, a lot of you. So Symantec, NetBackup, if you're using any VADP or VDP-based backup solutions, they all are basically going through vCenter. And so your backup stops working if vCenter is down, right? So it's very critical. So how do we measure high availability? So let's focus on that a little bit. What does high availability mean? And as an administrator, how do I measure it? So by definition, if you're looking for providing 4 nines of availability, that means you want your environment to be up, let's say 99.99% of time, then that means that you can tolerate certain number of failures in a certain year or in a certain timeline. So for example, here you can see if you get, let's say a failure every year, once a year, then if you can recover in 50 minutes or 52 minutes, you're still at 4 nines. If you get a failure, let's say every day, hope not, right? But if you do, then you need to be able to recover in 14 seconds to claim 99.99 availability, right? So it's a function of the timeline and how many failures you can tolerate. So one of the first things you have to do when you think of availability for vCenter is to ask yourself, in your environment, in your particular case, what is the RTO, the recovery time objective that you want to have for a vCenter? Can you tolerate an hour downtime, 4 hours, half day, 5 minutes? What is the tolerance? And then that would depend on what else are you using in your environment. Again, when you think of high availability for vCenter, it depends on high availability for every tier, right? So if your vCenter database is down, vCenter is down. If you have issues in storage and networking that powers the vCenter stack, vCenter is down. So again, when you think of availability, you have to make sure you build in, as best practice, you have availability built into each layer. And generally, for networking, for example, you might use some sort of NIC teaming or some sort of redundancy to provide better availability. Storage, again, generally it's 5 nines of availability with storage if you're using either, the right RAID system or the right level, options for your storage arrays. And on host side, again, we have availability options with vSphere HA and some of the options we'll discuss today. And then database and vCenter services themselves need to be resilient. So what we're going to focus on today in this presentation is assuming that the lower hardware stack is taken care of, what are we providing to take care of availability at the upper stack? So one of the principles of providing better availability is to reduce the dependencies. If you have a lot of components in your system, then any of those components can fail, and that means the whole system would not work as highly available as you would like. So what we have done is, in 6.0, we have really tried to consolidate or reconcile the number of services that we had in vCenter into fewer moving parts, right? So essentially what we did is, instead of saying, hey, you can deploy inventory service and web client and all other services in any VM you like we used to do in 5.5, in 6.0, we have made it very prescriptive. We're saying basically all the vCenter core services, inventory service, web client, auto deploy, have to be, or VPXT, have to be deployed together in one machine. And then you have the other thing called platform services controller, which is the rest of the services which we consider sort of common services, like SSO, licensing services, some of the newer certificate management features we have added into the platform services controller. So basically what we're saying is you have the vCenter node and the PSC node, and that together constitutes your vCenter. Of course, you have the database that I'll talk about later, which is, again, sitting outside in most cases. So you basically have three nodes, right? And what this would do is essentially make sure that there are not too many points of failure that you're trying to protect. Database, again, it's the primary repository where we store all of the state for vCenter. So again, you want to make sure it's protected. Typically, we have certified the Windows failover clustering option, also called, the Windows clustering for the database. So that's what people have been using. But then we have heard a lot of customers asking for support for always on for SQL Server. And so this is something we have added in 6.0 U1, certified with SQL Server AAG 2012, and 6.0 U1 for 2014. So 5.5 U3 certified for 2012 AAG, and 6.0 U1 certified for 2014 AAG. And this should take care of availability for the database. So I'll hand it over to Mohan to focus more on the 6.0 options that we have available.
So before I start, I want to take a poll on how many people still have physical vCenters. So, okay, a small number, that's good. So a lot of the options that we're going to talk about is assuming that you already moved to a virtual vCenter, which we've been recommending for the past 4 or 5 years now. So anyway, so let's move on. So if you look at VMware solutions, right, if you make your vCenter a VM, a lot of the solutions that protect a typical VM like vSphere HA, fault tolerance, and other solutions can also protect vCenter itself. So that's kind of the important benefit you get by making your vCenter a VM. So if you look at vSphere HA, it's very easy to configure. Almost all of you are familiar with it. And so it's kind of a no-brainer. So if you have a vCenter as a VM, you use vSphere HA. So how many of you use vSphere HA for your vCenters? Okay. Small number. Okay. So let's talk about all the different components one at a time. And so we'll go through these one by one. Okay. So let's look at vSphere HA, right? vSphere HA, what does it protect you against? When you have any kind of hardware failure and you have a cluster with no single points of failure, you can potentially have your vCenter be, if vCenter is in that part of the cluster, it would move, right? Let's say if you have an outage, then vCenter would, first of all, we have to detect the outage. So there's some time that takes for us to detect, a few seconds for us to detect the outage. Then vCenter is restarted in an available node, right? And then it takes like a few minutes for vCenter services to come up. So vSphere HA would protect you in the event of an outage, but there would be a few minutes of downtime. So that's one thing we have to be aware of. And remember, this is hardware level outage, not an application level outage. So we need to distinguish between that, because your outage could be a power failure. Outage could be an application level failure. This one protects you against the power failure or any kind of failure in the hardware components. The other important thing about vSphere HA is that it works along with DRS, and with DRS you can have a priority setting such that vCenter is automatically restarted with a high priority. So that's important. And one important best practice for us to follow when we have vCenter as a VM is that we need to be, let's say if vCenter goes down, how do you track where the vCenter is? So you have to be aware, you need to pin your vCenter to one or two hosts, so that in the event vCenter has to go down, you can directly log into those one or two hosts to find where vCenter is, in the event that vCenter doesn't come up, right? So those are some of the things that you can do with DRS rules. And then you have a high restart priority, so that vCenter comes up, is the first thing that comes up, right? And then the next thing is fault tolerance. Fault tolerance, let's explain what fault tolerance is. With 6.0, we've moved from having support for, we used to have only support for one vCPU, now we support 4 vCPU. So it's gotten a lot bigger. But fault tolerance, what does it do, right? And I mentioned that when we have a power event, when we have HA only, there is time for detecting the failure and starting the vCenter in a second node. Here we don't have that. We have two VMs running in lockstep. It's running across two physical machines. So in the event that any failure occurs, there's instantaneous cutover. But again, this is only hardware protection only. It doesn't necessarily protect you from any application level failures. So the main thing to take away from here is that FT has certain size limitations. As vCenter has grown in importance, a lot of the bigger vCenters will not fit into a 4 vCPU. So fault tolerance is applicable only to tiny and small. In our t-shirt sizes, we have tiny, small, medium, large. Tiny and small are the only VMs that fit into that. So it's got limited use. It gives you instantaneous cutover in a hardware when there's a hardware failure, but it doesn't necessarily protect you from anything else. So you can use it based on your own requirements. How many of you plan to use fault tolerance for vCenter? Very few. One person. Yeah. So this one, right, most of you are probably not aware of Watchdog. Watchdog is there by default. So we have it since 5.5, but in 6.0 we've made it very robust. So we want to make sure that VPXD and other processes associated with vCenter does not go down easily. Even if it goes down, we want to recover that without anyone noticing in the background. We want it to make, so what we've done is every critical vCenter process has a watchdog. And so it's available both in the appliance version and the Windows version. So in any of these processes fails, Watchdog catches it and immediately restarts it with minimum downtime. And if all else fails and it's not able to restart something, then it will restart the VM. So by doing this, we made vCenter pretty resilient. So as an application level, vCenter is pretty resilient. So a lot of the traditional things like heartbeat and other things you needed, not necessarily required because it wouldn't go down much. So that's the thing you have to take out from this. Right? So this is a common solution that customers use when they have physical vCenters and they want high availability. You use a Windows cluster and you set up Microsoft clustering across 2 physical boxes or a bunch of physical boxes, and have your VM or your physical node fail over between the 2 sites, right? So this kind of gives you added protection. If you have a Windows vCenter, for example, if you're doing patching, right, the vCenter has to go down for the entire duration of the patch if you have only 1 instance. Let's say you have clustering and you have 2 instances where you have a primary and a standby. You can patch 1 at a time. There'll be smaller downtime because you have to migrate your vCenter from the primary to standby, patch it, then migrate back. So you can reduce your downtime during OS patching. So that's one important benefit, and that's the main benefit of using this. But there is a lot of complexity that comes along with using a Microsoft cluster. So how many of you use Microsoft clustering with vCenter? Very few. Okay. So the other important component is we mentioned that the database is an important component. Obviously, if the database goes down, vCenter goes down. So we want to make sure. So here also we use Windows Server failover clustering, and then we need to have shared RDMs between the machines so that the clustering works. And SQL always on is not certified to be used to protect, was not certified, but now, as Madhu says, with 6.0 U1 it's certified. So previously, the reason we couldn't certify it was that AAG took a little longer than the failover cluster, and since the database is down for a longer period of time, the vCenter services time out. And so even though you might be failing over your database using AAG, it was not really coming up in a short enough time for the application servers not to time out. Here also, when you want to do any maintenance to your database, the downtime is reduced. So that's important. So based on all of these, right, what should I use, right? It would depend on the numbers that Madhu showed earlier, based on your RTO requirements, right? But if you look at it, most customers have vCenters as VMs. And then since you have vSphere HA by default, you have Watchdog, which is inbuilt to the system. The first option is the most common, and in many cases it would meet most customer requirements. As you go down the stack, there's a lot more complexity that you're adding. When you do fault tolerance, you need additional infrastructure. You have limitations on the size of the VM. So as you go down the stack, you see there's a complexity increases, the cost increases. But the bottom is where you get the best availability. So if you really need a lot of nines and you cannot tolerate loss, then you would probably go to the bottom. But obviously it's a lot more costly to do that. Operationally, it's much more complex to maintain. Okay. So now let's look at, we mentioned that there are 2 components in the vSphere 6, right? There's the platform services controller, and then there's the vCenter server. So we looked at the vCenter server's availability. Now let's look at the platform services controller. So the platform services controller can be deployed in 2 different modes, the embedded mode and the external PSC mode. If you really want high availability for your platform services controller, you have to deploy it in an external mode. So when you deploy it in an external mode, you can have multiple PSCs talking to each other. So the platform services controller, there's constant, stateful. That means there's stateful replication between all the platform services controller in an SSO domain. So because you have more than one, even if your platform services controller go down, if you have, we'll show later on topologies, you can have a load balancer where you can potentially put your platform services controller behind a load balancer, and then have your vCenters talk to the load balancer. So this is kind of what talk about, right? So in a single site, we have, let's say, have multiple vCenters, or like VDI and other things that have to talk to the platform services controller. Ideally, we would put them behind a load balancer. The platform services controller replicate between each other. So, and the load balancer is aware of what is available and what is loaded and not loaded. And based on that, the vCenter server would talk to the appropriate PSC. Right? And this is kind of showing you, if you evolve this to have multiple regions, right, and you have data centers in each region, how would it look like in a highly available state? So you could potentially have your vCenters clustered with Microsoft clustering, and then you can have your platform services controller behind a load balancer per region. And a lot of customers, right, they don't want to necessarily put a load balancer. So it adds complexity, right? Some of them, what they do is they actually have two platform services controller per site, but they don't necessarily have a load balancer. We have a way, in the event that one platform services controller goes down, you can manually point a vCenter to a platform services controller. So when they cannot or do not want to have a load balancer, they actually have a manual process that you can potentially point your vCenter to a platform services controller. So that's kind of a lot of the customers I talk to, they're going with that methodology where they don't necessarily have a load balancer, but they have availability with some manual processing, right? The important thing to remember, there's a common SSO domain, and there's also some limitations on the number of solutions that can talk to each other. There's a limitation on the number of vCenters that can be part of it and the number of per PSC domain. So you need to look at the documentation and plan your environment accordingly, right? So the next thing we'll talk about is one of the challenges when we first came out in 6.0 was backups, right? Now we have some data, there's some data in the PSC, and then there's some data in the vCenter. So when you want to be able to recover your vCenter environment, you need to be able to recover data for both components, and you need to be able to catch up one way or the other. So in our 6.0, before U1, we did not have a good story for backups for when we had an external PSC, because when your PSC is outside your vCenter, there could be differences in time when the backups happened. And if we didn't really have a good story on if you back a PSC at a different time compared to your vCenter, then things are out of sync, right? With 6.0 U1, as you see at the bottom, we have the capability to back up external PSCs, right? And the way we do it is, okay, let's say we back up our PSC, which is external, and we have a vCenter. Both of them are backed up at different times. So now if the PSC fails, and we want to recover a PSC, what happens is the PSC is restored from backups. It talks to any other remaining PSCs in the domain and comes up to date. And once it syncs up with the PSC and is up to date, it then starts servicing your vCenter. So that's the way you recover a PSC. In the event that a vCenter needs to be recovered, the vCenter backup is used to recover the vCenter, and then the vCenter talks to the PSC, syncs up with it, and then comes up. So that's kind of the story we have from vCenter backup and recovery, and which is a lot more like what you would expect in like an Active Directory domain, for example. How you back up AD, right? Things like that. So it's kind of very similar to how AD is backed up and recovered, right? So the things that we support with 6.0 U1 is that the backup is VADP compliant. So all the vendors that you typically use for backups for VMs would usually conform to that. So, and also VDP, we can potentially leverage VDP. The next couple of screens we show you how you can leverage VDP to do a backup. And then here we show you kind of how it's integrated into the vSphere web client. And then you can create backup jobs for your vCenter and your PSC. And then we can choose to back up your external PSC separately, and here we show you kind of the steps, just to give you a feel for it. And then in the event of a failure, you can use the same methodology, the same screens to recover your, using the web client, the vCenter, the PSC, and then the vCenter. So now I'll pass it back to Madhu.
Thanks, Mohan. So what we talked about are 6 options for high availability, right? And essentially we are saying vSphere HA along with Watchdog is a good combination, and that gives you around 30 minutes or so of RTO, recovery time. How many of you think that that's a good HA option for your needs, and that works well for you? Okay, so looks like a lot of you think that's not sufficient. So we need to think about what more we can do, especially as I was saying earlier, vCenter is getting more critical, and maybe you don't want to have a couple hours of downtime. So vSphere HA, depending on the inventory size, could go from 30 minutes to more than an hour of recovery time. So what I wanted to do today is also show you some of the work we are doing going forward beyond 6.0, and some ideas that we are exploring in terms of availability, which is built into vCenter. So you don't need any other third-party solution like Microsoft clustering or some other solution. There's some availability that's built into vCenter that we can give you as a feature, and you just get it out of box. So we just talked about some of the challenges with the current 6.0 options. Recovery time might not be in minutes like you would like. It might require third-party options, and also PSCHA, as we discussed, requires a load balancer. And these are the kind of the pain points that we are trying to address. So again, another thing that we were talking about was dependencies, and as you can see, end-to-end availability depends on availability in each layer. So if most of the layers are 4 nines, you still get only 3 nines for vCenter, because ultimately what it's doing is multiplying the availability across the stack. That means just by making each layer more available, you do increase availability for vCenter, but it may not be to the extent that you would want. So then what is the solution? What can we do? So the other option is to add redundancy, right? Which is you have one system at, let's say, 2 nines, you add another spare, and you can see every time you add a spare, your availability doubles. So it's just some math for people who care about the math, but ultimately it's saying you take 2 systems which are at 2 nines, and you will get 4 nines with the redundancy, right? So that's the principle that we're going to use going forward to introduce this new feature, where we are saying let's have a active-passive high availability solution built into vCenter, where we have an active vCenter and you keep a sort of a secondary, a passive vCenter, and then we fail over when we detect failure on the active. This is not something that's hopefully looking drastically different from what probably you've seen with other availability solutions. The interesting thing to note is that this is something we will give natively. We will obviously make sure it's enterprise class tested, works well for large environments, and then we'll make sure that the RTO, recovery time, in this model is within 5 to 15 minute range, right? So that's the idea. Let me go over the details a little bit more. So essentially we are saying there is an active vCenter, and then you are running a separate passive vCenter on another VM, and you have a third witness VM. There is obviously an IP address for each of the VMs, which is the private IP address that only the sort of the HA cluster knows. And then there is a separate public IP, which is used by the clients to connect to vCenter. In case the active fails, what happens? In case the active fails, we can automatically detect that failure of that active, and then we can fail over the public IP to the passive. So we make the passive node as active, and we move the public IP, and so the clients can just reconnect. So from the client's point of view, it would be just another refresh the connection, and it's connected, right? And this will be fully automated in the sense of detecting and failing over, right? So the thing to note is, in this state, your vCenter is back, but now this new vCenter is not protected because you don't have a passive. So you have to make sure that you now fix your broken node and you have a passive back so that you're back to you're back to the protected state so that you have protection again. Let's take the other scenario where instead of the active failing, let's say the passive fails, right? So in this scenario, basically we're saying the passive fails, and what does that mean? That means the active is still available, so there is no change that the clients would see. vCenter is still available, but it's just that you are not protected, because in case you have another failure, there will be nothing, we will not be able to fail over because the passive doesn't exist. So in this case, basically, you just have to make sure as soon as we tell you the passive has a problem, you have to go and set up a new passive so that you're back to the protection. So let's take another case, which is the witness fails, right? So the witness node is essentially a very small VM that's running the witness service. We plan to give you the same vCenter appliance as witness, but you don't have the other vCenter services running. It's just a simple service running, and the main purpose of the witness is to create a quorum, have a quorum, so that out of the 3 people we know which one is down, right? So out of 3, to know who is down, the other 2 can talk and say, oh, I don't see the third one, so I'm down. So it's basically just a quorum to solve the split brain problem. A lot of the HA solutions you might have seen use shared disk or shared storage as quorum, like Microsoft Cluster Services does that. And we were just trying to avoid the requirement for shared storage. How many people here think that high availability solution should not depend on requiring shared storage? Right, so a lot of you. So that was what we heard, and so we decided to say, let's have a third VM instead of requiring shared storage. So in this case, if the witness fails, basically it means you are in degraded protection. So you're not protected. Your vCenter is still available, active, running. It's just that you're not protected, right? So you just quickly go and provision a new witness so that you're back to the healthy state. So the plan is to, we're looking at providing this in a more automated fashion. So the setup of active passive witness itself is automated. So you just go to your vCenter, you say turn on HA, and we can automatically clone the active to create the passive and witness and set it up for you. And then when the failure happens, we can detect and fail over. So what are the benefits, right? This solution does not require any third-party technologies like Heartbeat did, right? How many of you used Heartbeat? Right. So it doesn't require any, that was the OEM, so there was a third-party solution we used to OEM. So no MSC, no third-party solution required. Recovery time we are targeting is within 15 minutes. So within 15 minutes, we should be able to fail over, make the passive node as active, and restart all the vCenter services. So we are all doing a lot of work to optimize the restart times for vCenter services. So for example, inventory service, right, which could be pretty large set of inventory, could take a while to start up. So we are optimizing all those vCenter services to make sure restarts are faster, we can detect failure quickly, and then we can fail over quickly. So the end-to-end downtime for vCenter is minimized. This solution is application aware. That means it doesn't just protect against storage and hardware and network issues, it also protects against application issues. So if there's a problem in the database or the vCenter service has an issue, we can detect that application problem or a failure with using Watchdog, as we were talking about earlier, and then Watchdog is being improved to say, hey, I think this vCenter service is down, it's a critical service, and that means tag it as critical failure, and then this automatic failover takes over, right? So we are making sure that it's application aware and not just protects against host and hardware failure. No shared storage required. And the last point, again, very important, we really want to make this solution very simple, so we are very focused on usability. Should be very easy to set up. One of the complaints we heard with Heartbeat was, oh, it's very tedious It takes forever to set up. Microsoft clustering, it's not that easy to set up. So we really want to make sure that this is almost a single-click setup. You go to your Active, single-click, set up HA, we clone, and we create the HA cluster for you. And then it's kind of integrated into vCenter product. The other thing we are focusing on is giving you a monitoring for this setup. So in case, let's say you have the active, passive, and witness setup, but let's say there's a problem in the setup. Let's say there's a network issue and the active, passive replication has an issue and it's not replicating. We will detect such problems and we will flag it to the administrator and say, hey, looks like your HA system has an issue. Most likely this seems to be the problem, and can you try to fix it? So we will give you monitoring for the setup itself so that you can make sure that you are protected at any given time. And this is going to be available for the vCenter appliance only. So we are currently focusing on making HA available for the appliance. How many of you have evaluated or have looked at the appliance, whether it's 5.5 or 6.0, but have looked at the appliance? Okay, that's great. So we are seeing a lot of interest in vCenter appliance, and we are seeing more and more customers moving to it, and that's why we decided to sort of prioritize building this for the appliance. So this is a demo. It's a demo. I'm going to take you through the flow. So we talked about it. There is we set up a VM with active vCenter, another VM with passive vCenter. They're replicating. I set up third VM called VCHA demo as the witness. So let's go to the web client, and you can see there is a demo active VM, and then there is a PSC. So it's a external PSC for vCenter. I'm going to run a quick script that currently basically clones this active vCenter to create the passive and the witness. So it's an automatic setup. We'll give you a button or something later, right? So it's just a clone operation that you can see is running. It sets up the active, passive, and the witness, and the cluster is set up. So now let's go ahead and simulate the failure. I'm going to simulate failure of the active node by powering off the active. So let's say I power off that VM, so that vCenter is in trouble, right? So this vCenter's public IP was 227, and I'm going to go ahead and power that VM off. So let's say it's powered off, so that vCenter goes down. And when vCenter goes down, you lose connection to the web client, right? vCenter is down. So this web client, if you refresh, is down. And within few minutes, passive node takes over. The passive node becomes the new active node, and you will see the web client is back. And if you see, the old active is now powered off, and the old passive becomes the new active node. And you can see the IP address has also moved. The 227 has moved from the old active to the new active, right? So this is almost there, but not quite out yet, right? So, and this is basically something we are sort of working on. And you can see it's pretty straightforward, right? I ran a script to just clone the active and set up. Of course, we'll give some sort of a UI option to be able to easily do that. So what are some of the, how many of you think this meets your needs? It's great. So it seems people like it. That's great. So the key takeaways, vSphere HA and Watchdog are currently the primary options for high availability in 6.0, right? You can have HA for PSC node as well, using the PSC replication as well as the load balancer that Mohan talked about. So you can have a good HA setup in 6.0 with an RTO of, let's say, 30 minutes to a couple hours for vCenter. Depends on the inventory size. Guest clustering is another option with Microsoft clustering, also called Windows failover clustering. That's an option for folks who are comfortable with Windows clustering or our Windows shops. That's an option that's certified for 5.5 and 6.0 and is available also. And then lastly, of course, we are exploring a native HA solution. That's the tech preview I showed you today. So that's pretty much it. There are some resources available. There is a white paper available for 5.5 and 6.0 clustering setup. Of course, there is documentation available on vCenter, vSphere HA, and what are some of the options you can choose in vSphere HA, specifically for vCenter HA. That's covered in the white paper as well. And there's a KB article as well. So let's take some questions. Is there a mic here that...
They have two mics.
Yes, we do have two mics. So folks can come here and ask their question. One mic is here.
It's done? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Go ahead.
I was wondering to ask what exactly, can you explain a little bit more detailed, what triggers the failover?
Sorry?
What exactly triggers the failover?
What detects the failover?
Triggers
The failover.
Yes.
Okay, so a failover is triggered whenever we detect failure either in storage, network, host, database, or vCenter application, right? And these failures would show up in different ways. For example, if the host is down, of course, vCenter is down, and we can detect that, right? Or what if there's a glitch in the network? If there's a big glitch in the network, and the witness and the passive node stop seeing the active node because the network connectivity is gone, yes, that's a failure, right? And we can know that that's the case. That's why we need the quorum disk to know that you've lost connectivity to the active. There could be failure in the vCenter application service itself. So if one of the services is down, let's say VPXD is down, again, as I said, we have the watchdog process that would detect that and say, hey, it's a failure. So we are building in logic to detect, all these kinds of failures. So the question is how long the service has to be down. Again, that's a detailed question. So in some cases, if we feel that it's not an important vCenter service, we just try to restart the service. The watchdog tries to restart the service. If the restart doesn't help, if it's a critical service, it tries to reboot the VM. And if that doesn't work, then it would tag it as a failure, right? So there is different levels of failure detection built into the watchdog. Yes. So it starts with the watchdog for the vCenter piece. Okay. Question.
Hi there. I was one of the users that used fault tolerance for my sins. I'm asking, my questions are in and around the nature of the synchronization between the active and the passive. Is that a bespoke database protocol? Is it synchronous? Is it asynchronous? What's the nature of that synchronous, that's a sync?
So it's a active-passive option with the appliance. So we're talking about the Postgres database that's replicating state between the active and passive.
And that's
so it's
leveraging
database replication.
Postgres's
it's going to be Postgres replication. Appliance is available with Postgres, and we have seen with 6.0, you can see great scale and performance for the appliance with Postgres. And we have some numbers available. There's a white paper published for vCenter appliance performance, and you can see that in terms of scale and performance, the appliance is at parity with vCenter Windows.
Okay, thank you very much.
Question? Sometimes I feel the standing mic is actually easier.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How long does it take you to point the vCenter server to another PSC? As you said, when you do it manually?
So it is instantaneous. You run a script and you point it. So it's pretty instantaneous. But somebody has to detect it and then point it. So that's the time to detect it and point it is the time of failure. Whereas if you have a load balancer, it's automatic.
Thank you.
Question?
Yes.
Are there plans to develop such a feature for the Windows installation, or is it only for the appliance even in the future?
Currently, the plan is only to do it for the appliance because for Windows, we do have the Microsoft clustering options certified, and we're going to continue with that for at least another release. And this one is for the appliance only for now, for at least the next release.
Yeah, we hope.
So that's why we are
We hope to
encouraging.
deprecate the Windows eventually.
So we are looking for customers to move towards the appliance, and give us feedback. So far, we have gotten very good feedback with the 6.0 appliance.
Any more questions?
Yeah, question here.
In regards to patching, will you be able to patch the standby node and then switch over, or do you have to take everything down for patching?
So we already support appliance patching. So you can go to a specific appliance and patch it. So for example, you can patch your active vCenter appliance, passive vCenter appliance, and the witness appliance. And we will give you documentation on the ordering. So you can go ahead and, in fact, this setup gives you less downtime for patching, because when you're patching the active, you can manually say failover, and you failover to the passive and then do the patching. So we will provide a manual failover option so that you can take care of planned downtime, let's say for patching or upgrade. Question?
Yeah. Are there any plans to have a failover PSC node for vCenter? So vCenter can automatically failover to a second PSC node without a load balancer in front.
Yeah, so one thing we actually didn't really mention too much is that in the next release, you can have multiple PSC without a load balancer. So your vCenter is actually aware that there are multiple PSCs, and it automatically points to the available PSC. So because of that, we don't need any additional. We're actually getting rid of the load balancer in the next release.
So the main role of the load balancer is for vCenter to just basically go to the right PSC, right? And have a virtual IP, basically, to seamlessly pick the PSC. That's the only reason why you need the load balancer. If you don't use the load balancer in 6.0, that's still fine. You will still get PSC replication. You still get PSC-HA. The only thing is VC will not be able to automatically go to the other PSC. You have to manually do that. So load balancer is only to make that thing automated. So in the next release, as Mohan said, we are building in the functionality of that load balancer, that part of the functionality, into vCenter itself, so that vCenter has a list of all the PSCs in the environment, and then it can have one of the PSCs as the sort of the affined PSC, and if that PSC goes down, it can automatically pick another PSC. So that's going to be built in the next release.
Yeah, and we'll also have location awareness, so that vCenter is talking to the closest PSC.
Question on the back?
Yes. For the vCenter appliance, which kind of database will continue? Is it the Postgres and Oracle database only?
So for the appliance, our plans, so embedded Postgres database is the de facto choice. So Postgres is built in, so it's in the same VM as vCenter. We do support external Oracle today. But we have already announced deprecation, as in it will be deprecated going forward, the external Oracle support for the appliance. So Postgres will be the option.
Hi, we recently upgraded our vCenter server appliance to 6.0, and by default the PSC was embedded. Should we move to external PSC, and if so, is it a big job to move to external PSC?
So with 6.0 U1, we have a repointing feature. So what we can do, U1 gives you is, once you have an embedded PSC and you want to go external, you go through this repointing process where it creates an external PSC, copies all the stuff from the embedded, and then brings down your embedded. So there is a process that already exists with U1.
Okay, thanks.
So let me ask a poll question. How many people have SSO with 5.5 have SSO running on the same machine as vCenter, like embedded SSO? Okay, how many of you have external SSO? Okay, so basically for when you upgrade from 5.5 to 6.0, the embedded SSO gets upgraded to embedded PSC. And if you have external SSO, it gets upgraded to external PSC. So that's the thing. And then as Mohan said, there's a repointing tool. If you want to go from embedded to external, then you upgrade and then repoint to an external PSC. So there's an option to go from embedded to external after the upgrade to 6.0.
And if you look at it, right, if you really want high availability, it has to be external. Embedded is very limited in scope. So that's one thing you have to remember. So most deployments we would think is external.
So there are two reasons to do external PSC. One is you want HA for PSC. and second is you want linked mode, enhanced link mode. If you don't have those two requirements, then you can stick to the embedded PSC. There is a session on vCenter install upgrade that's going to cover these options in detail and how to upgrade to 6.0. Mohan, when is the session?
There's one tomorrow and then one Thursday.
Yeah, so if you want more details on the install upgrade and these topologies, you can attend the session. There's also a session on the appliance on tomorrow afternoon. So if you're looking for more answers on the appliance itself, then we can cover that tomorrow.
This one more.
Let me take that and get back to you.
I have two questions for you, please. So, in order to decide which scenario is the best one, is there a high number of limitation for the number of data centers that you have connected to your vCenter? Like if you have a large environment of 80 data centers, will I go then for a Windows installation or for an appliance?
So as I said, from scale and performance point of view, the appliance, 6.0 appliance is at parity with vCenter Windows. So scale should not be the reason to pick one over the other.
But
there could be other reasons.
But SSO, right, you can have only a limited number, like 12 solutions, 12 things attached to it. So because of that, if you have 80, you probably cannot do it.
No, he's talking about Windows versus appliance.
Yeah.
Right? So that doesn't matter. But yes, if you're thinking about how many VCs can connect to a PSC, then you have to make sure you do the sizing right based on the environment that you have. But that's not a Windows to appliance versus appliance. It's about regular sizing for vCenter. Do it the right way, right, based on your environment.
Okay.
For both, you need to do the right sizing.
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
and
we had questions in the front.
I had another one. In the case of active-passive scenario, would it be required to have 2 licenses or 1 license for vCenter?
That's a tech preview feature. We haven't yet figured out the licensing. We'll get that. We'll get to it. Let's get the product first.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Questions in the front here? Yes.
Concerning the appliance, is there any plan to have more than 2 passive nodes? One passive node, so more than 2 in total?
Plans to do more than?
No, he wants more than 1 passive node.
Why we don't
like
have,
in SQL cluster?
Yeah, no, we are not planning to have that option because basically we are saying we protect against 1 failure at a time.
Except if you do patch management.
What is the problem with patch management?
If you patch a passive node, then if you have any problem, you have only 1 node left.
No, so if you have a problem with patching the passive node, you just set up a new passive because it gives you no downtime. Your active is still running. You just set up another passive.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. We had a question here as well in the front.
Yes.
Okay.
Hello. Do you have any plan to add more load balancer in the support list? Because right now it's only have 2 options.
So we are doing it based on customer demand. So
I'm asking 3 months early and don't have answer.
yeah, reach out to us. We'll make sure it's certified. Whatever load balancer you have.
We're already running on production, but anyway, it's need to be added in the list. Because it's working.
So the best answer I'm giving you is next release you will not need the load balancer.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Here.
Thank you. We would be very interested in moving across to the appliance, but we've got a very large estate, sort of nearly 5 figures of VMs.
How many VMs?
Nearly 5 figures. Nearly 10,000. We're
5
pretty
figures.
much maxing it out. We would love to go to the appliance now that the appliance has grown in size and you can actually have that amount of VMs with your embedded databases. What is the best way for me to migrate from my external SQL to the embedded PostgreSQL?
So very good question, very common question, a big gap. We don't really have an upgrade path yet. So we're working on an upgrade path. But in the meantime, a lot of customers I've seen, big customers, they actually build a brand new environment and migrate. That's one thing. So that's a no-brainer. Second thing, we have a Fling. I don't know whether Fling is not necessarily supported, but it's there. It's kind of a preview to what we are actually building. So you can potentially try the Fling to actually migrate your data.
So in tomorrow's session, appliance session, I will show you a tech preview of the migration tool that we are working on, official tool to help you migrate your inventory from Windows, SQL, and Oracle to appliance. We are trying hard to see if we can release that tool faster, but at least we have it in tech preview. For customers, as he said, a lot of customers, are okay when they go to a next big release of vSphere like 6.0. They're okay with starting fresh. In that case, you can get started with the appliance today. But yes, if you are looking to move your inventory, and if it's a large inventory, then you will have to wait for the migration tool.
Because we use Heartbeat as well, and you got rid of that as well. So.
We have heard a lot of customers asking for it, and we are working on it. So you should definitely attend tomorrow's session, at least see the tech preview, and let us know if you think we are in the right direction.
I apologize, this is a bit of a left field question. Are there any plans to port VCSA onto Photon?
So we are looking at that. Currently, VCSA comes with SUSE 11, and then next release probably we might move to SUSE 12. Photon is in the plans in the future. It all depends on the direction Photon goes and how popular it becomes, and then we might decide to make that as the within the appliance. So it is in the roadmap, but it all depends on how the success of the Photon project.
Yeah.
Hello. Oh, does it work? Yeah, thank you. You spoke about application awareness, or let's say vCenter application awareness for the active-passive thing. And what I'm wondering, how does this synchronization work? So is there a setting for getting things asynchronous? Or, yeah?
So the current plan, again, this is all under development, right? The current plan is to do sync replication. So active to passive replication is Postgres, not async, sync replication. And so it would require certain level of network latency and bandwidth, right? So we are looking at, if you have both active and passive in the same data center, you should be fine. If it's in different data center, like 2 different sites, then if you have good a fiber connection or something, you should be fine. But basically, we are looking at a sync replication only. Async is not something we are looking at.
So metro cluster is usually metro region is your boundary.
But I was only wondering because if there would be an application failure on the one side, then we replicate it via synchronous replication to the other side.
Okay, so the sync or async would not matter in that case, right? What we are saying is we are not doing storage level replication here. If it was a solution using storage replication, then it will have the problem you said, which is any application failures will also get replicated, right? This is not a storage replication option. It's doing replication at the DB level, so it's replicating the vCenter state from this site to that site. So it will not have that problem.
Only scenario you might have the problem if there's a DB corruption. So that is obviously, you're replicating the DB corruption as well, then there's a problem.
Chances of DB corruption in vCenter environments, we haven't seen that much.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.